Good morning. Today is Friday, February 16th, 2024, 4:30 a.m. Just finished listening to a YouTube posted speech by Ayn Rand called Art in Education. I wanted to make this note because I'm just learning about this woman, philosopher. I think she's a philosopher. Just in the last 2 days, I've listened to probably 3 or 4 of her talks and interviews and descriptions, and I found this one to be particularly insightful. Even though she characterizes religion as, impotent, a distraction, and so forth, my guess is that she is not a religious person. I'll have to find out more about her. However, I believe her insights are very, at this point at least, they seem to be very well conceived, articulate, but also accurate from my own perspective, from what I'm looking at as to the influences on humanity, on people, and this suppression of values that she talks about that is culturally evoked even from childhood based on the input and castigation of others for having the audacity to think outside the box and to project a personal vision of something that might be greater, I find to be very compelling, because I believe that ultimately this is the and I will say this also, that I believe her representation of reality in these conversations reminds me also of Jordan Peterson and his reflections. In both cases, these individuals come from different backgrounds, but with a similar purpose. They want to understand what's going on, and they're very intelligent, articulate, and spent their lives observing and writing and communicating what they see and how they see it. And I find in both cases, there's overlap and focus on the heart of man and his intrinsic abilities and the suppression of those abilities through external events. And those external events impact the self-image, self-awareness of that individual and have a behavioral impact. It changes how they act, changes who they are from that standpoint. And I'm going to make this suggestion. I think that the piece missing, if I can be so arrogant and bold as to suggest that I might see something here, but I believe the piece that is missing is the agency of intelligent evil, and the whole premise that we have through the Bible as it describes this epic battle between good and evil. That can be overlaid on top of her conversation, or you could read and interpret her words through this lens. You can see clearly this manifestation of good and evil, and yet we somehow are missing a variable. We're missing this component that is right in front of us, that if we are to consider all of these things and then add that variable into the mix, I think the light will come on. It will be obvious. We'll be able to see motive and opportunity and the evidence of the existence of this influence in our world. That's why I want to consider using talks like this and others. I'm still very fresh in looking at this, but it may be useful to be introduced to some of these things now versus 20 years ago, because I would have had no idea, would not have been able to make this observation without the experience that I've had up to this point. That said, I think there's a strong case to be made that just by comparing these and other individuals that I haven't seen yet, who've or listened to, who have made a lifetime of study and articulation of this situation, that if we were to look at their observations through this lens that considers this as hypothesizes and considers it through the lens of the reality of intelligent evil and its influence, I think a compelling case can be made, almost scientific, and very. I don't think it's too far a stretch to presume that science actually could be involved, because this is something that is manifests in our realm through our behavior, through patterns of behavior, and through discernible patterns of behavior throughout all the different cultures of humanity that live on the planet. There are some behavior expressions that are consistent in different cultures, languages, and so forth. I think a compelling case could be made to study that and observe that. And then also, I think a description of an application of biblical principles of deliverance and in a very practical sense. Whereas we are talking spiritual things, this is where the intersection of the mystical and the physical take place, and I believe that's a reality. I believe that even science gives the nod to that reality when you consider all of the different intellectuals today speak about spiritual experiences in some way, primarily through drug inducement and other types of means of cognitive and psychological expansion, that it's assumed, but it's not talked about. This aspect is, but yet it is talked about, because the metaphors are clear. People use these metaphors in their descriptions: evil, demonic, Satan himself. All of these types of things find their way into these intellectual, philosophical conversations, and yet it's not taken seriously. So what if we did? What if we took that seriously? What if we considered that this is actually a possibility? And what if we studied that consideration and looked to test it and verify that using the scientific method. I don't think that's any more unreasonable than the tests and assumptions we make when we point a telescope at the sky and we launch telescopes into space so that we can gather information and continue to refine our hypotheses of how things work. That's how we discovered the expanding universe, by observing the red light shift. That was something that Einstein at first denied, but then was compelled to acquiesce to the facts, to the observations, to the evidence that he's seen. It was undeniable. That was the conclusion based on what was assumed and what we've known so far. And I think that's a discovery process, obviously, as is this aspect that I'm talking about. It's a discovery process, but in order to discover, we have to look. And in order to look, we have to have a reason. There's got to be something we're looking for. And we have to believe that there's at least anecdotal evidence to suggest that that's a possibility. So I'm going to stop now on that last point of anecdotal evidence, because I have a whole discussion about anecdotal evidence that relates to this. But I just wanted to make these thoughts now while they're fresh. And yeah, that's all.